I found some interesting articles about grizzly attacks in Yellowstone Park and some old issues of outdoor life, so I thought I'd share them with you. The following telegraphic report appeared in a Denver newspaper on August 16th last. Giant grizzly bear battles two guides in Yellowstone Park. Ned Frost and Ed Jones, torn and bleeding, fight until roars of beasts bring tourists to rescue. Cody, Wyoming, August 16th. Ned Frost, Yellowstone Park guide and noted hunter, and Edward Jones, a cook, were badly injured Monday night near a lake hotel in Yellowstone Park in a one-sided battle with an immense grizzly bear. They were brought to Cody last night in serious condition, but are expected to recover. Frost was conducting a tourist pack train through the park, Jones being the outfit's cook. Because of park regulations, the party traveled without arms. Monday night, Jones discovered a female bear raiding the camp grub outfit. Bears, protected in the park, roam unmolested and ordinarily are not vicious. So Jones did not hesitate to attempt to drive the animal away. Resenting his interference, the bear charged, hurled him 20 feet with a blow from its paw, and was mauling his back when his yells brought Frost to the scene. Unarmed but undismayed, Frost unhesitatingly went into battle, attacking the enraged beast with the first weapon he could seize, a frying pan. The bear turned upon Frost, and an unequal battle with all the advantage on the side of the grizzly ensued. A sweep of the bear's claws tore Frost's leg open from the hip to the knee, but he fought on, floundering away from the grizzly's lunges and belaboring her with whatever he could lay hands on. Jones, almost disabled, rejoined the fray, and the two men between them succeeded in confusing the bear so it wasted its efforts in attempting to maul both at the same time. The noise of the battle brought tourists running to the camp, and the bear fled. Frost and Jones were taken to the hotel, where an army surgeon dressed their wounds. Tuesday they were removed to the Frost and Richards Ranch, 20 miles west of Cody, and last evening were brought to town. The condition of both is serious, that of Jones particularly. The flesh of his back was cut to ribbons from shoulders to thighs by the bear's claws. He lost much blood. Frost's leg was laid open to the bone, and he may be permanently crippled. Frost is one of the best known of the park guides. He discovered Ned Frost's cave on the road to the park, which has never been explored, and which is believed to be larger than Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. Immediately after reading the above, we wrote to Mr. Frost, with whom we have hunted big game in Wyoming on 3 different occasions, and received a personal letter, which, although not intended for publication, we hope Mr. Frost will not object to our using, for the general interest and the scientific value it will be to our readers. My dear McGuire, your very nice letter just received 5 minutes ago, and as this is my first day out of bed, and I am trying to do some writing, I will drop you a few lines, which I hope will reach you before you go on for your sheep hunt. And right here, let me wish you great luck and that you will get a 17-inch ram. You are sure going into sheep country there. As to the bear scrap, I really feel that both Jonesy and I are lucky to be alive today. It was a very large, old grizzly that mixed it with us. I think likely an old male, and I don't recall ever seeing a bear that looked bigger. We were asleep and knew nothing of his approach until he grabbed Jonesy and shook him out of bed and hit him with his paw and knocked him down. Jonesy's yells awoke Shorty and me, and as I roused up in bed I grabbed the first thing I could, which happened to be my pillow, and threw it at the bear. As it struck right in front of them, I think it saved Jonesy from pretty near certain death, but the old devil got me located then and came for me. I had presence of mind to pull my bedding over me and double up my arms and legs so he couldn't get at my body very well, and that is all that saved me, I think. He shook me like a rat, rearing on his hind feet for 3 or 4 times, and this is what tore my flesh so about the knees, and this too, right through an 1/18 tarp, 6 thicknesses of blankets, and a wool comforter. There were 7 places cut to the bone, and the main artery exposed for 3 inches along the side of the left knee, but I was just lucky to escape having the knee joint opened, and don't believe I shall have a stiff leg. There was an automobile party camped about a mile from us, and they came and took us to the Lake Hotel, where 2 good Eastern doctors were working on us within an hour after the encounter. There were 28 stitches and a couple of drains put in my leg, and Jonesy had nearly that many, I guess, put in the muscles of his back and shoulder where the bear had grabbed him, also through his bedding, and shook him out of his bed. I think it was lucky he left Jonesy for me just as he got him out of bed, and I also believe without doubt he would have killed me instantly on getting out of bed, only that he shook me 7 feet and under some young jack pines and failed to see me go, for he stayed with my bed and tore it all to pieces before he left, while I made my getaway behind the thick young jack pines. This is the first time I have ever heard of any bear attacking anyone wholly unprovoked, and our experience only goes to show that you can never tell what a grizzly will do. Wyoming, Ned W. Frost. When we referred in our preface to Mr. Frost's letter to the scientific value of his interesting account, we do not believe that we put it too strongly for this experience, the first of the kind either Mr. Frost or we have ever known to have happened in the United States, will write a new chapter in the history of the bear of this country. It is true that we have all read of thrilling encounters with bears in the daily press, some of them alleged to be unprovoked, but when run down they have invariably been found to be pure fabrications, or else written by ambitious young reporters with imaginations excessively fertile. We have also been told of such unprovoked encounters, but when questioned about their authenticity, we have been told that old Bill Smith was the man, but that Bill died some years ago, and the only other man who could verify the encounter had lately removed to Timbuktu, South Africa, or some other equally inaccessible place, etc., etc., ad libitum ad nauseam. Of course, the big brown bears of Alaska are excluded from above references, because there seem to have been some very well authenticated instances of these bears attacking without provocation, especially when met at close quarters. Therefore, the above letter, written by one of the greatest hunters and guides in this country, whose veracity and honor we would guarantee as strongly as our bank account, is really a contribution to science, although Mr. Frost and his friend have paid very dearly for the honor of making the contribution. If Mr. Frost were able to meet his foe with a high-powered gun, we have no doubt that he would be willing to stage the experience over again, provided the bear was first seen at a distance sufficient to allow him to place 2 or 3 shots in his anatomy before reaching him. The experience of these men will teach us all, while hunting dangerous game, to be prepared for the unexpected, and also even the unheard-of acts of these animals. It will also, we hope, cause the Yellowstone National Park officials to put into effect some new plan that will better safeguard the lives of guides and travelers in that place. The late grizzly bear attacks in Yellowstone National Park. The attacks upon human beings that have been committed by the big grizzly bear in Yellowstone National Park during the past summer and fall have aroused the fear of travelers and the interest of naturalists throughout the length and breadth of our country. Never before in our present generation has even the oldest mountaineer or woodsman in the United States known of a bear of any kind attacking men while they slept. In Alaska, the big brown bears have been accused of doing so many unaccountable and extraordinary things that we would not care to stand sponsor for their good or their bad behavior, for we have never hunted them. But we know whereof we speak when we make the statement above regarding our bears in the States. Under ordinary circumstances, a hunter is as safe to sleep on a grizzly trail, where the fresh tracks of these animals are seen made within only a few hours, as he would be in jail. Bears used to attack much more readily 100 years ago than they do now, or since they have learned from sad experience that the man smell is a very bad smell to run up against. In the past few months, there have been at least 3 distinct attacks made upon men in the Yellowstone Park by a grizzly bear. During the past summer, Chub June was chewed up and badly lacerated by a grizzly near Sylvian Lake. Ned Frost and Ed Jones were terribly cut up by a grizzly near the Lake Hotel on August 14th, while on September 7th, Jack Welch, a freighter, was so badly torn up by a big grizzly at 10 Mile Spring near Turbid Lake that he died a few days later. Welch was the only one of the 4 men whose injuries proved fatal. There is no doubt in our mind, or in the minds of those familiar with these attacks, that they were all committed by the same bear. It might possibly have been a female, and it is possible in the earlier part of the year she was called upon to defend her young against a human, in which case she might have killed the man. If his acquaintance in the park were slight, or his identity obscure, he might have not been missed. Once having obtained the taste of human blood, she or he kept on attacking men whenever a favorable opportunity was afforded. If a female, her cub or cubs, if she had any, were not with her when those attacks were made. Many versions of the Welch attack have come to us through newspapers and otherwise, but the most authentic and complete that we have received is from Major Amos A. Fries, in charge of engineering work in the park. According to Mr. Fries, Welch, who was driving a freight team, was camped at 10 Mile Spring, about 60 miles from headquarters. He and one of his helpers slept under the wagon, and another helper slept on top. The wagon was loaded with hay and oats. About 1 o'clock in the morning, writes Major Fries, Mr. Devlin, who was asleep under the wagon with Mr. Welch, was awakened and heard a bear approaching. The bear started at Mr. Devlin, who threw his bedding and blankets at it, and yelled to wake up Mr. Welch. Mr. Devlin then clambered to the top of the load as fast as he could, while the bear ran to the opposite side of the wagon and grabbed Mr. Welch, who was a little slow in getting out from under the wagon. The bear pulled him out, but the two men on top of the load of forage threw a lunchbox at the bear and began throwing the hay on him, which forced him to let Mr. Welch go. Mr. Welch then started to climb on the wagon when the bear rushed and grabbed him and pulled him down. Again the bear was frightened off, but grabbed Mr. Welch a third time as he was trying to get on the wagon. It was probably during this last attack that he mangled Mr. Welch so terribly about the left shoulder and on his side and abdomen. For the third time, the two men on the wagon began tumbling bales of hay on the bear and drove him back, and then succeeded in getting Mr. Welch on top of the wagon. A few moments later, when one of the men was getting ready to go on horseback to Foreman Muse's camp at Sylvan Pass, 8 miles beyond where Mr. Welch was attacked, an automobile came along with two men, and Mr. Welch and the two men with him were taken to Muse's camp. The men in the auto were requested to take Mr. Welch back to the lake where there is a hospital, but they refused to do so, though if they had, Mr. Welch would have had a vastly better chance for life. Unfortunately, I have so far been unable to learn the names of the human brutes in the car. An ambulance was sent from headquarters by direction of Major Fries, and made the trip of 64 miles to the camp in a little less than 4 hours. Everything possible was done for him at the hospital, but to no avail. His body was buried at the post cemetery. The scene of this tragedy, said Major Fries, was about 6 miles from where Ned Frost of the firm Frost & Richard, who conduct camping parties through the park, was attacked by a bear one night and badly torn. At the same time, one of Mr. Frost's men was attacked and torn. However, the bear was scared away and both recovered. Frost and Richard were camped at Indian Pond, 4 miles from the lake junction and about a quarter of a mile off the main Cody Road. All agree that it was a grizzly in both cases, and it seems fair to assume that since the attacks took place in the same general locality, probably it was the same bear. Colonel Brett has given orders to hunt this bear and kill him. A few days later than this, a big grizzly bear came round Muse's camp in Sylvan Pass, and under my instruction, a bait was set for him, and 15 sticks of 40% dynamite were set off under his neck. Needless to say, the bear died at once. A remedy suggested for the Yellowstone Park bears. Editor Outdoor Life. In the October Outdoor Life, there's an account of Messrs. Frost and Jones being badly chewed up by a grizzly bear, written by Mr. Frost himself. There is also a statement to the effect that the same grizzly did the same thing to 2 others. This in the November number. That it was the same grizzly that chewed the men at different times, it seems to be only an assumption, I presume to protect other grizzlies. Since I was the senior member of the tourist party that Mr. Frost spoke about taking him and Mr. Jones to the hotel after their laceration by the bear, I thought it might be of interest to your readers to tell what I know about the bear that did the chewing and also suggest a remedy. In Mr. Frost's account of his being chewed up, he speaks of a camp of tourists a mile away that took him to the Lake Hotel. He is mistaken in the distance. We were at his camp several times the next morning, and it was not more than 60 or 80 rods from where we camped. But I expect, suffering as he was, he thought that the party from our camp had time to come a mile. The night Messrs. Frost and Jones were chewed up by the bear was our first night in the park, an experience I expect our party will remember for several months. In fact, it is so vividly impressed upon the minds of the women in our party that I doubt if you could hire them to go through the park again and camp out unless there is something done about the bears, especially the grizzlies. My wife and I were touring the park with our son and his wife, Judge Timball of Laramie, Wyoming, his court reporter, and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson. As I stated, it was our first night in the park. We came in by the Cody entrance and camped off the main road near the Yellowstone Lake, but close to a spring. Our camp was in the open. Mr. Frost's was nearer to the lake, but in the timber. About dusk, Mr. Frost came to our camp. We did not know him either, and stayed a short time. Then, about 8 o'clock, he kindly came back to inform us, knowing we had no experience with bears in the park, that about 4 o'clock he saw 2 brown bears and a grizzly in a grove a short distance from where we had camped. He told us how long they had been in the park, but almost positively assured us that they were harmless, except that they would steal our provisions if we did not take good care of them. We went to bed after securing our provisions with the utmost care, for had not one of the most prominent guides in the park, who had been going through there for years, almost guaranteed the harmlessness of the bears, including the grizzly, and to add to all the guidebooks, and I think some official in the Interior Department said the same thing, and we believed it implicitly. Wife and I slept in the auto, but son and wife slept in a tent a few feet away, and beyond them was the other auto where the other party slept. I was not feeling well that night. Between 12 and 1 o'clock, I got up and walked around the camp. I had just gotten into our auto, and before lying down, I heard something nosing around in the cooking vessels lying on the ground not over 3 feet away from our auto. I looked out the front of the auto, which was all open, and saw a grizzly bear nosing in the pans. He or she seemed to be about as big as a gray horse. I was perfectly calm, for I believed all the dope I had heard and read about their harmlessness. I spoke to my wife, and she looked at him. I then began to make a whistling noise, and he started off towards Mr. Frost's camp. After running about 30 or 40 feet, he stopped and turned his head around as if coming back. I remarked to my wife, "He is coming back. I'll have to get out and run him off with a club," something I certainly would have done, for I believed him harmless. But I made a whistling noise again, and he loped away toward Mr. Frost's camp. I had just gotten comfortably under cover, about time enough for Mr. Grizzly to get to Mr. Frost's camp, when wife and I heard the most awful yelling imaginable. "This noise woke up the other members of our camp," I remarked. "They are having a time keeping the bear away from their provision." But wife insisted that somebody was being hurt. In just a few minutes, the horse wrangler from Mr. Frost's camp came riding wildly excited to get an auto to take the wounded man to the Lake Hotel, about 5 miles away. Mr. Patterson and his wife, as quickly as possible in their auto, got to the wounded man and took them to the hotel, returning with 2 soldiers who had stood guard the balance of the night. If this bear that wife and I saw was the same one that chewed up all the men mentioned, doing so because he had eaten a man that no one knows about, developing the man-eating habit as someone suggested, I wonder why he did not attack me, for he undoubtedly saw me, or my son in the tent, for he had his nose close by it. Whatever the theories about the grizzlies that may be advanced in their favor, the facts are they are dangerous to campers in the Yellowstone Park. If our parks are to become the playgrounds of the people, not for a rich few who can afford to stop at the hotels, they must camp out while touring the parks. One of 2 things will have to be done about the grizzly bears. One is to kill them all off, the other is to let them alone so that they can multiply so rapidly that they will wander into the surrounding forest reserves for the pleasure of the hunters of big game. The latter plan will prevail, then the tourists who camp must be protected from them. If the grizzly cannot climb, then let the government build bear-tight fences around its numerous camping grounds that it has provided for the campers, and notify all that there is danger on the outside of these corrals after night. I heard this plan urged by numerous people. The slaughterhouse behind the Mammoth Hot Springs is protected by a fence of poles and barbed wire from the intrusion of bears. Washington, L.C. Tidball. A grizzly attack in Yellowstone National Park years ago. Editor Outdoor Life. I have just read your article in the December issue of your superb magazine in regard to the attacks of grizzly bears in the Yellowstone National Park. You state that these attacks upon persons while asleep at night have never occurred until quite recently. Mr. McNash, whose residence for many years was Dayton, Sheridan County, Wyoming, while helping to conduct a touring party of some 25 to 50 persons from the well-known Eaton Resort at Wolf, Wyoming, on an overland trip through the park, was sleeping out with many others at a camp they had made between Sylvan Pass and the bridge over Yellowstone River near the Lake Hotel. I presume the camp was at or near the 10-Mile Spring. Sometime in the night, Mr. Nash awoke without any apparent reason or cause, and to his consternation was looking right into the open jaws of a large grizzly, but a very few inches from his face. By some means Mr. Nash tore loose from the animal, and making all the outcry he could, started to run around the wagon, near which he and others were sleeping. The bear followed. The whole camp was of course soon aroused and succeeded in driving the grizzly off without further damage. There were 2 surgeons in the party who dressed the wound, which required, I think, some dozen or more stitches. Mr. Nash, with whom I enjoyed an intimate acquaintance for some years, related this occurrence to me himself, and it can be amply vouched for by many people around the Dayton, Wyoming, and by the Eaton brothers of Wolf, Wyoming. I think Mr. Howard Eaton himself was conducting the party. Mr. Nash himself was killed a few years after this happened by a fall from a vicious horse. Suffice it to say he was as truthful and upright a man as I ever met. After reading your article, I wondered whether all these attacks were not chargeable to one and the same grizzly, occurring, as all they did, in the same immediate neighborhood. This animal, perhaps at the same time in his earlier career, got a taste of human blood, and finding it to his liking, sought to repeat the experience. A companion, Mr. Ed L. Trapp of Sydney, Ohio, and I, while making the trip with wagon and team through the park, camped one night at a spring some 5 miles, more or less, west of Sylvan Pass. The spring was at the right of the road, going west, in a small park, through which ran a small mountain stream, a very wild, picturesque place indeed, nicely adapted to camping. I do not know that the spring had at that time any name. That was in September 1908, but I judge it was about 10 miles from the eastern entrance to the park, and maybe about 10 miles from the western foot of the Sylvan Mountain. We were entirely alone, our guns sealed, and as bears frequently at that time were molesting camps and grub boxes, we felt no little apprehension as to what might happen during the night in the form of a call from Uncle Ephraim. However, it being very late, and we having made a long drive that day, after picketing the horses in the very good grass on the eastern side of the road, and pitching our teepee a few rods off the western side of the road, we hurriedly got supper, made our bed, and were soon entirely unconscious of labor or dangers. In the early morning we awoke, and Ed started across the road to see if the horses were all right. Pretty soon he called to me to come to him, as he was standing in the road, looking intently upon the ground. Upon reaching the spot he pointed out what were the largest tracks I had ever seen. Indeed, they looked to be about 2 feet long, and then beside them were some small tracks about as large as a dog track, the cub no doubt. They had passed along the road during the night, but attended strictly to their own business. The horses were all right. Permit me to say I enjoy outdoor life very much. It's the best ever. Wyoming, C. W. Thompson, M.D. My take on all of this is that it was likely the same bear responsible for all these serious attacks, given that they happened so close to each other. People of this era would like to attribute the cause of these attacks to a mother with cubs, or a bear that has some sort of acquired taste for human blood, and I think that neither of these things are true. The idea that an animal has a desire for human blood once it has bitten someone is a very oversimplified idea that was applied also to dogs. Dogs, just like bears, can be prompted to act on predatory or defensive instinct, or they can learn that a certain behavior is beneficial to them. Regardless, even though we may never know with certainty what caused these attacks, it is my opinion that this bear had predatory instincts towards humans, as happens naturally but not all the time. A bear that has started to lose its fear of humans and now starts to see them as prey may decide to only attack sleeping humans, as that is the least risky thing to do from the perspective of the bear. Finally, if people truly understood how dangerous bears were at this time, they would not feed them, and they certainly wouldn't prohibit travelers from carrying weapons. The fact that bears frequently took unsecured food from camps, as mentioned before, is obvious evidence that the bears had learned to associate humans with food.